All right, so we just had Polaris over the weekend, and in the finals was Mateusz Szczecinski versus PJ Barch, and I just thought this was a really interesting match, and would be one that's worth going back through, particularly to look at some of the things that PJ was doing with his passing, particularly the sort of like leg weave he was doing, but overall, like very interesting match, and I just thought it'd be good to go back through it here. So overall, this is very, very interesting because Mateusz has like submitted PJ with the armbar previously on the Polaris Squads event with the same sort of armbar that he tapped a lot of people with in this event. He tapped Michael Lera Jr. He tapped Gary Tonin at ADCC with this armbar, where it's this idea of working a scoop grip, to enter into K guard, things like this, and then his opponent's trying to control his leg there and preventing him from throwing the leg across the back of the leg there, trying to avoid that connection for the leg entanglement. I've used a similar thing before, or at least like the same sort of situation where someone is trying to prevent your other leg from connecting to the back of their hips there, and then so you're threatening the arm they're controlling with. But in that case, I used a coil lock, but the principle is the same and fits into the same sort of scenario there. So this is going to be one of the big threats, and what we're going to focus on with some of the modifications that PJ's made to his passing through this match. So see this here, see how he's trying to prevent Mateusz from getting across him. Mateusz has like a preference for how he attacks from his guard, where generally speaking he is trying to attack K guard on the one side here. He doesn't really do it all that often on the other leg. He has a preference for trying to shoot a leg across, his right leg across the hip here, and trying to entangle on this side. Generally he plays, exactly like this here. See how he's looking for this scoop grip. And so what's interesting here is see how Mateusz has entered in. If we see this here, he's entered in. So PJ trying to control his ankle here, trying to control the ankle that's going to go over his hip there. But he's trying to be mindful of, well, this other ankle is not available right now. But I imagine in his mind here, and one of the added pressures is going to be preventing, this leg from coming across when he wants to actually attack, but without actually committing his hand to the ankle there, he makes himself vulnerable for the armbar. It's a little bit different when you're holding the hip here, for example, and other parts of the leg. The real issue is when you're holding onto the ankle, because then they can swing out with that leg and they force your arm to get extended. Like if we just imagine here for a second, Mateusz swings that left leg out and PJ's hand is connected to the ankle there. You can see how now we end up with an extended arm, and then this puts PJ into trouble. So we can see here, Mateusz scooping the leg, but notice his 2 feet pointing in this direction here. And we talk about this idea with guard retention, is this idea of misaligned legs, where I want to, as the passer, have their 2 feet pointing in one direction so I can circle away from the 2 feet there. And then the same thing as like the guard players, we want to keep our feet misaligned from each other to not create those opportunities. And then there's, of course, an exception for over-under passing, which we see small amounts of through this match here. But what we're seeing is Mateusz is scooping the leg, wanting to enter in, I think trying to throw that left leg across, which is pretty much exactly how he entered in at DeAndre Corbet. And then PJ doing a good job here. See how he's dropping, capitalizing on the 2 feet pointing in the same direction there to try and start setting up his pass. So Mateusz doing a good job here, framing towards the shoulder, so that way he can try and recover his guard. And then now we're back in an open guard situation there. I feel like through this match, and we'll see a little bit more of this, is I feel like PJ could have done more of trying to maybe pass on the outside first to create more opportunities for himself. But also know PJ's got very, very good guard passing. I remember training with Owen Jones back in Bali forever ago, and he spoke about how much PJ's passing at that stage had improved. And I think we're seeing like PJ's passing just continuing to improve, especially now that he's training with Chris Wojcik. Chris Wojcik's moved out to San Diego, so I think this will be really interesting to see is some of the evolutions in PJ's passing. And so this is the thing here, and this is where I feel like PJ could be potentially creating more threats on the guard here, where we're in this sort of, sort of seated versus standing situation here. Now, it's different things that PJ's doing really well here is making sure he's not allowing Mateusz to get under his head position here. He's starting to try and create threats on the legs. One of the big mistakes people make oftentimes is they stay stuck on the hand fight, which is allowing their opponent to start connecting their legs towards your legs there, which is the key thing that you're looking for as the guard player, is to get your legs to work. Like if we oftentimes think about, okay, well, what's the whole point of passing someone's guard is to take away their ability to use their legs. So oftentimes people get too stuck on like what's happening up here. And don't get me wrong, there is things to be done in the upper body. For example, using collar ties to force a hand to post to start shooting to a body lock, things like this. But people get very fixated on the hand fight with not really an intention there of actually getting to any position. And see this here, like, PJ's not sort of staying stuck on this hand here, and Mateusz is trying to keep him stuck on this hand. Like there's definitely utility in this sort of grip here, because see how now he's starting to create exposure on the waist. Beautiful. So exactly this here. So we're seeing Toreando versus seated. Great technique to use. People oftentimes assume that you have to use a Toreando against a supine player, but this is absolutely not the case. And this is a really good way to start creating great angles. And I would actually even argue that a Toreando versus a seated player is typically more effective than a supine player, because notice when someone plays seated, they play oftentimes with their feet out in front of them here. See how Mateusz is smart though? He keeps sort of one foot tucked back there, but this still means that this presents a preferred side for PJ to try and pass to here, because now it's a little bit tougher for Mateusz to try and high leg on this side here. So see how if you try, now this is actually a really good opportunity for PJ to try and pass, because the feet sort of tuck in here. And so now we're going to have this great opportunity for the Toreando, assuming that you can get your hands to legs. And this is exactly what I'm talking about with wanting to, as the guard play, get your hands on your opponent's hands there so they can't just start controlling your feet. But we see this here, the insertion at the hip, really, really nice. Potentially, PJ could have used sort of Joseph Chen style head pummeling there to try and pop the foot out. And now this is where we're seeing the leg weave come in that I mentioned at the start there. Now, generally I've thought of the leg weave as being more of like a grip that top players use to stall a little bit here. But in this case, I actually think it's quite interesting, and we'll see this a little bit later, where what it does is it gives control over where Mateusz can bring his hips. So if we think about like Mateusz wants to, say for example, shoot his right leg over the hip here for a K guard, he needs to be able to bring his hips across to then actually meaningfully entangle his leg, or he could bring the leg towards his hips there, but it's a little bit tougher. So what this does is it stops Mateusz from being able to actually bring his hips across to PJ's leg. And so this is where I think this grip can be quite interesting, because instead of trying to deal with the problem maybe of the left leg coming over, which it still definitely does that, like to some degree, especially if we can keep it sort of trapped in here using his shoulder, and then also creates these potential opportunities for like back steps and things like this as well. Essentially, we've talked about like, say for example, against a lasso, when someone lassos your arm there, starting to think about, sort of working like a leg trap in a way, but without actually hugging the leg necessarily, sort of just backstepping from there to create an angle on the guard. So I think this grip is interesting here when you combine it with a lot of like modern passing ideas against like modern sort of guard play ideas versus in the past I feel like it's more used as a bit of a stalling grip. In this case I think PJ's using it in some very intelligent ways to set up some of his passing here. And so right now we've got the hand fight here. Now one of the things PJ's got to keep in mind as he brings his arm across into the leg weaves is he does have to worry about arm drag variation. So because there's some creative ideas around either going into sort of shoulder drags against this here. He could think about Mateusz could think about bringing that top leg out and arm dragging PJ. So he's going to be very mindful here of his head position. A lot of the back take threats from this grip are going to be shut down if PJ can keep his head across inside of that top hip there. Anytime if his head gets shifted across to this side of Mateusz's body, then he's going to get into trouble, and there is going to be those threats to the back take. So you can see this here. So see how exactly that there, Mateusz is trying to reach across to the leg. And also as well, actually, it potentially, depending on how it's used, can also shut down false reap entries too, potentially. Yeah, so this is interesting here, because in this case, and I mentioned like Mateusz normally attacks K on this side here, but he's actually going to then switch across. So we see the sort of like tricep lasso grip. We've talked about this before, where one of the issues with sort of tricep gripping over the lasso versus inside of the lasso is going to be the lack of control over the rest of the arm here. But in this case, I don't think Mateusz really cares all that much, and he's going to use this grip to anchor himself to PJ and bring himself across to this side. But see, this is very smart on PJ's part here, because see how PJ is going to run himself across. So see this here. So what he does, and if you watch Joseph Chen, he does a lot of the same thing here, where he's going to run himself all the way across to the other side of Mateusz's body. Watch this. Just like this here. And look at the sort of situation it puts Mateusz in. Because generally speaking, when we're retaining our guard, we don't want to be in positions like this. And see how, again, we're talking about like that idea of like the 2 feet pointing across the body there. Puts him in a very good passing position. And then now we're essentially back on almost like that leg weave there. So I think this is really, really interesting the way he's using this. And I also like the idea of what Mateusz is doing there with the tricep lasso to try and set up the K guard. But it's just PJ's just countered it so nicely. Super quickly, like and subscribe. And so you can see this here, the immediate switch. And so this is what I was talking about with using the lasso in a more proactive way. And this is really nice here from PJ. So watch this. So we're going to see the J-point Toreando here initially. Mateusz doing a good job pummeling that left leg towards the lasso here. This is nice. But look at like PJ's head position. So this is a really important idea when you're thinking about trying to counter this lasso, is using your head position here. Helps shut down like a lot of these options, because especially say for example, if you look at I think Andrew Tackett versus Owen O'Flanagan, Andrew Tackett uses his head position here, and the idea is against the lasso, he just circles and then uses his head position to shut down the use of this leg. And so now PJ is going to make this immediate switch towards the leg weave, which is nice here. And watch this. And so this is pretty much the same as the Andrew Tackett, Owen O'Flanagan thing. Now, Andrew doesn't use the leg weave from what I recall, but the core idea is his head positioning versus the lasso. Now, from here, see this left hand reverse collar tying to control Mateusz's head, so he can't actually try and make space like this here. But this is a smart thing from Mateusz's part. So I've talked about this recently with the way that I like to try and counter some of the J-point camping, which is actually using like a cross lat frame here to funnel someone to north-south. Now, this cross lat frame, or one of the things you'd be thinking is, why would you try and funnel someone to north-south to retain your guard? Well, you're doing it in a way where you're trying to then get ready for that battle before you're actually there. So you're setting some of the things in place that you need. And now we talk about when we're framing, for example, wanting to frame towards the part of their body that they're intending to lead the pass with. And so when we get to a north-south situation, they want to try and bring their shoulders inside of the hips. So what we'd be thinking about here, especially when PJ has used his head positioning to beat Mateusz's legs, Mateusz is going to use this lat frame here, and then he can use it to make space to bring his knees in front of the knees in front of the shoulders here. See, exactly like this. Because then he can use that to then, continue to make space, get his legs back inside, and then even go so far if what I like to do, and I sort of stole this idea from Lucas Cannard, is you funnel them to north-south. So we're going to have this cross lat frame here, which is the right idea, bringing knees inside, and then ideally using it to try and bring a foot across the center line here. So you'd be thinking about using your forearms against the shoulders to make knees against the shoulders to ultimately end up bringing feet across the center line, because then there's no pass from there, and then you can go immediately into some of your K-guard attacks. And so we see just briefly there, just as a follow-up, PJ's sort of using that sort of hip scoop, like the Kente Uemoto style there, to try and get the knees pointing away. Doesn't quite get it though, but then comes immediately back into this J-point camping here. Not really giving Mateusz a chance to sort of recover. Now, this is smart on Mateusz's part, because what he does here is he actually changes hips, and this is something we've talked about before with something Lucas Cannard does, is, they're J-point camping on one side, we're going to pivot and change hips here instead. But now watch this. See, I think PJ go into maybe an over-under or a double-under pass from here. So we see this change in posture from Mateusz. And see, this stuff is happening very, very fast. This is one of the things that changes at a high level, is that people are recognizing and adapting to the situations as they're happening significantly faster than what you would see in like lower belt situations, which is why you see these sort of deep sequences play out. So we're seeing this change here into convex posture, which leads nicely into trying to come back over the top of the legs here. So as someone's like starting to recover their guard, they're lifting their hips, they're moving their feet. It creates opportunities for us to go underneath their hips instead. And so they're going to go from that concave posture, shoulders rounded forward, to a convex posture where we're thinking about leaning back. And I've probably heard me talk about this on a bunch of other videos in regards to guard retention, but it's just such an important idea to understand. So we're seeing here, similar thing. And now, I was going to say, I'm assuming we can expect now, since PJ's done it both times now against the lasso, is he's going to switch towards the leg weave straight away. Now, we can't see exactly where his hand is, but just judging by the fact that his hand was inside of the hip there and it's now disappeared, it's probably inside of the bottom hip there. Yeah, exactly. And so see this here. So we're thinking about winning with the head position battle. This is a trade-off here where controlling the wrist can be quite useful as the top player. But it can also take away your ability, especially if it's a mercy grip, to then have to start being able to try and control this bottom leg. I'd prefer, if I could, to try and think about more so gripping inside of the wrist here. Yeah, exactly. So Mateusz here, trying to look to control that hand. And now here as the bottom player, I feel like to avoid starting to get extended, I'd prefer to self-frame so I can keep that space at my right hip closed off rather than leaning away. And so we can see this here. So this is where the leg weave is going to be really interesting because see, Mateusz is scooping inside of PJ's leg here. But see how now he actually can't bring himself to the leg, both because of PJ's head position here and because of the leg weave. And so now it's shut down Mateusz's ability to enter in on that leg. So I think this is like, and this is why I wanted to go back through this match, is to me, this is the key thing to take away from this match is what PJ's doing there. And so we're seeing this sort of omoplata, but like, see, here's the thing. Mateusz is going omoplata, but he doesn't really want the omoplata. He wants the K-guard that comes off of the omoplata there. Omoplata, just generally speaking, not great at submitting people. It's commonly taught, but overall I'd say not very effective at submitting people. I don't think we've seen anyone at a high level get submitted with an omoplata for quite a long time in no-gi. There was the recent match with Nolan Stewart and Adam Wazinski where Adam got submitted with the omoplata, and I think in the gi it's a different story. I think gi it's much more effective, but no-gi not very effective at submitting people just because of the lack of control that you have over so many different parts of their body. It's so hard to break someone down. So normally you see it more so as an entry like this here to enter into K-guard on that leg, but you can see this here, PJ recognizing this and already circling in that direction there and ending up in the same sort of position we saw before from the lasso. So now we're seeing the same leg weave again here against the lasso. And now this is, so watch this here. So this is interesting. And I show a similar idea from like split squat, but not with these grips, but well, actually with this grip, yes, but not with the leg weave. But this idea of using your left knee here to walk to the center line, because then you start thinking, you're beating this bottom hip here, walking to the center line to start getting the top knee pointing away from you, or anticipating an over-exaggeration with that top knee there. To shut it down. So it's interesting to see PJ using a similar idea there. Now we're seeing the same thing here. The omoplata into the K-guard attack there. This time PJ using more of a hip scoop, the Kenta style hip scoop that I pointed out before, rather than sort of running over the shoulder. It might be like a matter of, sort of how deep into the entry they are, for example, and then using this to get into a good north-south passing situation here. So if we just go back for a second. Because actually, and this is interesting here, so, because more so in the gi, there's an interesting technique here where people will use, and this is something I remember using at white belt actually, was taking the lasso and then using an inversion from the lasso to go to the omoplata. And so this might be like Mateusz trying to bring that back to a degree, but more so to actually start setting up the K-guard entry rather than actually wanting the omoplata, especially when you can't bring yourself across on this side here. And that might be what he did earlier, for example, when he ended up on the K-guard. This might be one of those things where I don't recognize it at the time, but it's actually very deliberately what he's doing is bringing back that sort of classic entry where you go lasso, invert to omoplata, and then now it's just linking up the omoplata with the K-guard entry. No, in this case here, actually, he doesn't invert. He actually just kicks his leg through. But I do wonder if that's potentially an option then. Yeah, so he actually just swings his hips out instead. But still, like that idea of like trying to shoot towards the arm lock there. But then, yeah, PJ matching it here with the hip scoop to get into a good north-south passing situation here. And so notice this here. So watch this. So see how PJ doesn't reach to the hip straight away? Like he grips, but notice he's blocking more so on the leg here. Like see this lat frame instead. This is key in this situation here when you're trying to threaten this. So I talked about before the coil lock. Coil lock is great in this situation when someone reaches to your hip because you can bring that foot across their center line and then at the very least use that to recover your guard. But if you're maximizing it, you're using it to arm lock your opponent. And so as the passer, you need to make sure you don't just reach to the hip naively here. You need to stay back on the shoulders so you can contend with this leg first, bring your body inside of this space, and then you can move up to the hip. And so this is exactly this here, because what it allows PJ to do is keep his elbow active against the calf there. Notice this here. See how he doesn't reach to the hip? We want to end up on the hips eventually. And so to see this here now, he's starting to use the hip scoop to try and create this angle. Mateusz does a good job here framing and then bringing his head away. And now we're ending up on the lasso again. And so I'm assuming we're going to see PJ switching back in towards... well, this is interesting here actually, because now he's got the foot on the opposite side. So now this is actually quite similar to the Mikey passing. But instead of going sort of under and over the leg, he's going like, using a leg weave instead. So rather than that Leo Vieira scoopy whoopy grip, He's got the leg weave here, but it's the same passing situation actually, and we sort of talked about this before with the head position, for example. So I think this is quite interesting here. Now let's bring that back, because I want to see what he does with his left hand, and if he forces Mateusz's foot in here. Because see this here, this is potentially a saddle entry for Mateusz, but PJ is doing a good job here with this leg weave, potentially blocking the hips from coming across. So I want to just see. So you've got Mateusz's heel pushed to his butt here, left hand passing across, lasso, then switching to the leg weave. Nice. Because what then PJ can do is then try and get that foot forced across here, so then 2 feet are pointing in the same direction, and then he can go back into his pass. Right now it acts as a little bit of a barrier. He could use his head position, for example, here. Notice Mateusz using the collar tie here, because I talked about before, off the leg weave, how you want to keep their head outside of your hip here, or outside of this sort of like top like line of like hip and shoulder. You want to keep it off this side of your body. So the collar tie allows him to shift PJ's head position. So this is really interesting. But now actually Mateusz is using it more so to like pull him in. I think this would be better if he sort of used it to try and actually sort of bury his elbow inside here, stopping PJ from getting inside of the pocket of his hip, and then being able to push the head across. Because watch this here. Yeah, because now we're starting to see the same situation again, but see how now, again, matching with the cross lat frame. So we're seeing them battling here because they recognize they've been in this situation before. Yeah, exactly. So they're getting ready for it now. And I think actually potentially PJ might have been better off trying to pull the trigger here. But then at the same time, it depends on how much energy he feels like he's expending off the previous attempts versus if he just went for it right now. Because it could be that one of those things where it's not causing him to spend too much energy, and he knows that he might go to north-south, and Mateusz is starting to retain his guard, but then it keeps him ahead on potentially winning the decision. But I think he waited too long here. And then this is why now he's going to attempt it, and Mateusz is going to be able to just retain straight away. Because watch this here. See how Mateusz is more angled onto his side here. He's not so flat. PJ's head's not quite inside of the hip anymore. So therefore, Mateusz is able to recover against that quite quickly. So this is the thing. I think PJ should have pulled the trigger on that straight away, because he went for it anyway, but he waited too long, and then it allowed Mateusz to sort of start recovering some of his guard a little bit and taking back a few little elements away from PJ. So same thing here, looking to try and circle towards the head position off of the K-guard. So we're going to see, so hand inside of the top hip here. Mateusz looking for the K-guard there. Now there is the triangle entries here, and I actually spoke about this specific triangle entry off of the recent sort of upper body attacks out of K-guard, where people won't control the ankle necessarily, but they'll hug your leg, and so you can think about driving your knee over the shoulder here, just like a shoulder drag, where you try and go to a crucifix, but you're going to use it to then shoot up into the opposite triangle here. And what you're anticipating is then pulling away with the upper body. And I pointed this out when I was breaking down some of my ADCC trials matches, where I briefly threatened it in that first match there. But yeah, PJ starting to circle in this direction here. And so I actually don't know if there's too much that we're going to be able to pick up from the rest of this match, because I feel like that sequence there is the most interesting part, is that sort of leg weave battle there versus the K-guard entries. And so let's have a look at this here, because Mateusz actually managed to get a serious like leg lock entry on him here. So we're seeing the same sorts of things: head position, controlling the feet to create an angle, getting 2 feet pointing in the same direction so he can go into his J-point camp. Mateusz doing a good job framing here, but see, PJ actually got quite deep in on this J-point. And see how like Mateusz is having to make big movements to pummel his feet here. If you're enjoying this match breakdown, check out atomicdojo.com.au, where I have over 100 other commentaries just like this. So he's managed to get the lasso. Now, this time here, he's managed to lasso over the shoulder, over his head. PJ, what he can do here is use his head position to circle out. But see, this grip here might actually stop PJ from being able to pull his head out in this direction. I don't know if this is something Mateusz knows is specifically trying to counter, versus just holding the armpit so he can keep himself pulled across towards this leg here. I'm not 100% sure, but either way, it potentially stops PJ from circling his head under and into Mateusz's ankle. Yeah, because you can see there, see how he just briefly goes to clasp on the arm. I don't know why he necessarily wants that, if there's like an arm lock that he believes he has from here, like potentially a Choi bar entry. I don't know if that works too well from here specifically. But but PJ still circles the hand inside. At the very least, if Mateusz wants the arm lock, the hand has to be over in this direction, just because if he tries to attack the arm lock from here, PJ's going to be able to just pull his arm out too easily. Which is maybe not a bad thing, actually, in this given situation, because, it then it forces PJ to have to reset. But yeah, so here now PJ's head is out of position, so he's definitely not going to be able to get the entry. Now what Mateusz wants to be able to do is, I would say generally speaking, he seems to prefer shooting that top foot over the hip sometimes to then enter in on this leg. Me personally, I'd rather bring it across to the other hip to then enter in on PJ's other leg, for example. Yeah, so like this here. Oh, but you know what? Now he's made that pummel with his right foot. So he's gone to like a body X position here. So now he's got options of entering on either leg. When he brings this across, it means that he's going to be entering on this leg, but he also has the opportunity to take that foot out and then have a K guard on the opposite leg as well, which is one of the beauties of body X. Because see this here, so see how now he's able to use his leg position here to shift PJ's weight away. Enter in on this K guard here nicely, and now see this here. So this is what I'm talking about the coil lock opportunity. So PJ bringing this across here to try and PJ bringing his arm across here to prevent Mateusz connecting his leg to PJ's hip. And so now Mateusz could potentially go towards a coil lock from here if he threads that left foot through. But I think PJ's doing a good job here shifting his weight out in this direction, because it makes it difficult for Mateusz to be able to actually pummel that foot inside of the hip there. And I believe this is the end of the round here. So Mateusz has got this initial K-guard entry here, but they're going to actually end the round, so we don't really see a conclusion to this particular entry. And so this is what I was talking about here with the changing of sides from the leg weave, similar to a leg trap here. So this is what I was talking about. So Mateusz brings the foot inside here, so PJ is going to control the foot and circle. So I talked about this idea right at the start of the match, where against like a lasso, for example, we can still backstep just like a leg trap here and use this to create an angle on the guard. So this is nice here. And Mateusz does a good job there. And obviously PJ must have like his preference for which side he wants to pass to. The same way Mateusz has like his preference for which side he wants to attack on. Like he generally wants to attack off of his right hip. And so now we're starting to see some of the more like double under entries and things like this here. PJ's just got to be careful of the triangles. And now we're seeing potentially sort of like a Trico Plata style of entry here, where see how PJ's hands on the outside. And so now using this inside frame here to again control Mateusz's hips so he can't bring himself across. And I don't know if Mateusz ever really uses the Trico Plata. This might be something that he does specifically against double under entries. So if we look at this here, so he goes to try and shoot the K guard. PJ does a good job here, but notice PJ actually does like more of like an actual, almost like a bicep tie style frame, where he goes inside rather than actually underneath the leg there. And so instead, he punches his hand through. And so this is where you'll see people use like Barado Platas and things like this. In this case, the Trico Plata, and bringing his head across, versus a Barado Plata entry is done a little bit more differently, where you weave your hand around the opposite direction and you stay square with your opponent. And so see this here, he's trying to use his left leg to control the head, the posture of PJ. We do the same thing off of a Choi bar we've talked about before. And so one of the things that's making this tough for Mateusz right here is that his grip is quite high in the armpit versus controlling more of the elbow, where he can bring the elbow out in front of the body here. If we think about like when we're attacking Kimuras from guard and things like this, where the top player wants to be able to keep their elbow behind their wrist, and as the guard player or the attacker, we want to get his elbow in front of his wrist here. So right now, PJ's arm is in this position on the right here, like it's pulled back in this direction. And Mateusz wants to be able to bring the elbow forward. Now, pulling on the shoulder is not going to bring the elbow forward, which is why he wants to have his grip at the elbow, because he can physically pull on the elbow and get it pointed across the body just like that. And now he might be potentially considering switching in towards a K-guard. With the current gripping configuration, it might be a little bit difficult to make that switch to the scoop without like PJ being able to potentially read it. But see this here, so now he's bringing his leg down, he's trying to expose that elbow there. But then what PJ can potentially do is now step over Mateusz's leg. And so essentially here what PJ's done is he's actually countered this just like he would the K-guard entry. Because the configuration of the body is the same, which is interesting here. See how he's walking and stepping across the body and just like stepping up here. And this is good facial expression from Mateusz there. So now we're seeing Mateusz using more of a hip post here, which is interesting. Allows him to control distance here. Does expose his foot to being controlled, but allows him to also set up his foot to be able to shoot across the hip there. And so see this here. So we're going to see, yeah, exactly this. So head positioning here, getting inside of the knee. Not quite the leg weave because it's inside of the top hip there. It's more of just a lasso situation. And so see this here. So we drive the knee over to try and contend with this arm because it allows him to shoot the triangle. But he doesn't quite clear the actual leg there. See, because I prefer personally, if I'm going to do this, see how he's driving with his knee and then PJ's shoulder's able to sort of move with it there, versus if we can get our left hand cupping the shoulder, then we can pull the shoulder towards us, and then now we can like get our leg to clear his arm there, versus see how like Mateusz is like, using his hand was like cupping on this shoulder. If his hand cups the other shoulder, yeah, see exactly like that there. And now PJ's switching back towards the leg weave here, and so now he's a better passing situation for himself. And see how now insisting on that head staying over the top side here. And so now there's different things you can do to try and sort of disconnect from the bottom leg there. You can use, like, you can sort of like back step off of it. You could think about, going from more of a shin cut to circle. But again, like it's not going to be necessarily that fruitful unless he can get his head in good position as he tries to circle there. So now this is a bit of a tricky situation for Mateusz because he's got to be careful because his back can potentially get exposed here, or he might be able to enter in on PJ's leg. But now he's done a good job bringing himself back in, almost into like a waiter style situation. Or more of like a rear X guard now from like a waiter. And so this is what I'm talking about here. See how like, 2 steps ahead, both of these guys, where Mateusz is behind him. PJ's turning the corner here, but then see how Mateusz is already retaining his guard, but then PJ's trying to drop into a new passing situation here. See how he's already bringing his head inside of the knee. And this is what I'm talking about with the difference at a high level, is these guys are ready for these situations several steps ahead. Not necessarily even specifically thinking about it, but just their ability to preempt it as it's happening. Like, it's not sort of like chess in that regard where guys are thinking, okay, well, he does this, he does this, he does this, because you don't have the same amount of time to think about the moves, but more so because a lot of the situations are so rehearsed, you're able to preempt it and have like some of the solutions already sort of like mentally calculated in, like long before the match starts. But I do think there are some like ideas from chess that you can borrow in that regard. But more so to do with the ability to make decisions under time constraints. And so this is an interesting sequence here because now we're starting to see a slight deviation in the strategy that we're seeing for both these guys so we're seeing the same sort of situation here. We're seeing the leg weave here because it controls Mateusz's hips. He's stuffing that foot inside there. And we're going to see this inversion from Mateusz where he uses it to try and attack on the opposite side, effectively like a body X spin. Or, sorry, not a body X spin, but like throwing towards the omoplata on this side here. And so we're seeing PJ circling in this direction, but see how now instead of going towards the hip scoop, he actually goes towards a chest to back camp. He goes towards this stack pass here and tries to get underneath. And so this is again where we're talking about that convex posture, trying to get his hips low again for Mateusz. And he also does a good job stepping on the shoulder here because it's going to stop PJ from dipping his shoulder and staying underneath the hips. But so I think this is like a nice little deviation from what's happening there where, they ended up in the same situation a few times here. So then PJ's trying to sort of change what he's going for, where instead of going towards the hip scoop, bringing that left arm across there, which is what he's done a few times previously, see how instead the hips come up. So instead he goes towards like a stack pass. But then this is what I mean, like Mateusz reacting so quickly here, getting his hips low to then recover his guard. But then that will be a good opportunity for them PJ to try and go back into some outside passing. And so probably here we can expect, that hand to come back. Yeah, oh, this is nice here. Cool. So this is what I'm talking about. So with sort of the lasso sort of situation and then circling that side again. So we're seeing this a few times now. So we're seeing the lasso here. Because I was about to say, this is where we can probably expect PJ to go towards his leg weave. But instead, smart move on his part. And I love pinning the wrist from here. This is such a good sort of little thing you can use that really shuts down the bottom plate from doing a bunch of things. Allows you to pin the shoulders because, for example, here, watch this. So it makes it tougher now for Mateusz to turn onto his side because his right shoulder is going to stay a little bit more stuck to the floor there. So see this here, it allows PJ to get this good angle, and now his head's in good position here, similar to the opposite side. See how he's trying to bring his head inside of this knee here, over this leg, inside of the knee. Trying to stay inside there. But see, Mateusz is smart here because he's framing towards his arm to make it difficult for PJ sort of extending out. And I think PJ could have potentially continued to try and circle in this direction to create that threat on the guard. I'm not sure quite why he didn't. It could just be like honestly energy expenditure, which is totally fair. So we can see here again. So thinking about against a seated player, going in towards his Toreandos, which is, again, just always a good technique. Seeing the lasso as a counter here, head inside of the hip. Trying to control this ankle so it doesn't shoot across. I think he's trying to go to his leg weave here, but he loses this head positioning. And I'm not sure why that is necessarily. Like, it looks like here PJ almost pulled it over the hip there for a second. I don't know if because he wants to think about trying to counter leg lock, which he's been known to do. And there is like good options here of sitting back into this leg. And I think like this would actually be, when we've talked about before, sort of that elbow wedge to draw into like an Arimiyashi sort of position against a K-guard. I think because Mateusz shoots his foot so far over the hip, it'd actually be very effective here. Yeah, and you can see for a second there the armbar, but PJ a little bit more savvy to it this time here. When Mateusz trying to control the wrist. This time here actually because, yeah, it's framing inside of the hip. So see, and this is what I was talking about with controlling the ankle where the arm gets far more extended. Because the hand's inside of the hip there, the armbar is there, absolutely is there. But it's just not going to be extended to the same degree versus when you're holding the ankle and they swing out and it forces your arm to get drawn away from your body. Because then here, see how PJ is able to then potentially pull his arm away. But the thing is the threat on the arm, it's a great option as the guard player. Because what's going to happen is either you're going to get the arm bar or they're pulling their arm away, in which case then now you're going to get the opportunity on the leg. Not sure why Mateusz didn't commit there. Again, could have been an energy expenditure issue. Potentially the knee coming inside there as well. You know what, actually, it could even be that the knee was because the knee arm comes away. No, but Mateusz could have potentially, yeah, so I think it's maybe an energy expenditure issue there. Like just like you're getting later in the match and it's tired and you don't want to necessarily go into like the same dynamic techniques, which is pretty reasonable, honestly. Like the deeper you get into a match, the harder it is to make a lot of those dynamic movements and doing it explosively. Especially when you know, okay, I'm going to enter into his leg here, takes a bit of energy for me to do it. I know he's going to do this counter, which then takes me energy like to counter there. So it becomes a little bit tougher to go down some of these routes. And so this was nice here. So watch this, the quick shooting the foot over the hip, where we've got the lasso, PJ wanting to try and then circle here, but then let's go. But then see, this is really nice from Mateusz. He's able to just shoot this foot across the hip there, which he wasn't able to do previously. And then now he's actually got some triangle opportunities here. So PJ's got to be really careful and see where the cupping of the shoulder here. I'd like to see Mateusz threatening that opposite triangle more. I'm sure it's something he's got in his arsenal, but it's maybe not his like A-game move to go for. And there might be good reason for it. Like it might be he doesn't like lifting his hips like this because he doesn't like the potential threats of like stack passes and things like this, which I think is pretty reasonable, honestly. But it would be cool to see him sort of throw that out there a little bit more. And so then that's the end of the second round. And so they're going to go into a third round now. But I believe the third round they go into is actually less. Oh, for some reason I had in my head, I was like, maybe it's less time. I'm not sure. Oh, and then, yeah, there's a little bit of a games here at the start where Mateusz has got to have grips to pull guard. And so not that it really makes a difference, though, honestly, when there's not points scored in this rule set versus PJ versus Levi. It was a little bit different because they do actually score points for major actions like takedowns and things like this. So the actual guard pull itself does make a little bit of a difference there. And like it can potentially affect the decision a little bit, but I think the way that they sort of the way that they make the decisions for this rule set is more to do with being able to threaten submissions as like the priority there. And so we're seeing this leg weave here again, pinning the wrist. And so this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to actually pass the guard here. Because if we go back here for a second, we've got to think about this. So we've got one hand committed to sort of leg weaving here, but then now he can either, we can think about pinning his wrist, for example, but then if we pin his wrist, he can potentially bring that leg out. So we've got to try and use our legs to try and pin his legs here. But then we're also having to use our own legs to stay on top and stay standing, or, kneeling in this case. And this is why like passing the guard is so difficult, because we're effectively, like for the most part, the guard player actually has more resources to work with. They have more limbs that they can actually try and do to achieve their task. And this time now, so we're talking about the head positioning, and I was saying before about Mateusz using a collar tie. In this case here, using more of this sort of forearm frame here, or like a cross shoulder frame to try and shift the head positioning, potentially. Also a good option. Thank you for watching. If you want access to over 1,000 more videos, as well as community chat where you can ask questions, get feedback, and also it's the only place where I actually take video requests, check out the link below. And then now we're starting to see the tricep lasso here. But in this case, he's sort of, I don't know if he's actually, it might not even be necessarily a tricep lasso, because he might actually be framing on this side, knowing that PJ's about to try and change sides on him. And so then now here, so watch this. So this was nice from PJ. And so we're talking about the feet going in the same direction here. And so I feel like this is a mistake that Mateusz has made twice now, where he's reaching for the scoop, but his legs are very far out of position. It happened early in the match here, and it's happening now against PJ, where see how his 2 feet are over on this side of PJ's body. And so he's reaching for the scoop here, but I feel like this is a big mistake on Mateusz's part. I don't know if it's because he thinks like, okay, I'm going to be able to bring this left foot across, but it is taking a big risk here, because now there are no frames in between him and PJ. Right now, this left hand is on the outside here. Both of these legs are out and away. And this right arm's like, out of position here. So I don't know if this is a good move on Mateusz's part. Because see this here. Now, he does a good job then bringing his legs back in front, but it's, he does a good job bringing his legs back in front here, but it's a big risk regardless. And that's sort of the second time he's done that in this match. And I don't know if it's because he's just very confident with how to bring his legs back in front of him there to be able to then continue attacking, which is entirely possible. And look, the truth is that at some point you do need to make some concessions on your guard retention to get attacks going. So let's go back here, because now we saw the false reap entry. And this is what I was talking about here with the leg weave, potentially being able to deal with the false, or actually I don't even think it's a false reap entry. I think it's just directly a saddle entry. False reap's a slightly different thing and sometimes gets confused. Yeah, so it's just directly an entry into saddle there. And I think what happened here is that PJ brought his own hips across to Mateusz's hips. See how he brings himself up to Mateusz here, so that Mateusz can just connect his hips and legs around this leg here straight away, which is kind of the opposite of what you want to be using, kind of the opposite of how you want to be using that leg weave. PJ does a good job there, like immediately starting to turn out and hide his heel. Because see exactly this here, you want to be using this sort of positioning here to prevent Mateusz from being able to connect himself to you. More so, I think it protects better against this leg, because this leg is further away versus potentially this leg here. Just because that leg just happens to be closer, it's going to be harder to stop that. And this is what I'm talking about with like contending with the upper bodies. Like you can push on the shoulders, for example, there. Cool. So this is nice here. Let's have a look at this. So forcing him supine here. We're ending up in our J-point camp. Head inside. We're going to switch towards so the leg weave here, controlling the ankle just like this. And so, yeah, exactly. So Mateusz bringing that back inside. Starting to circle here, but then see this. So as Mateusz's hips starting to lift, wanting to go into the hip scoop here. Potentially could go into the stack pass even as well. Yeah, out of this here, which is exactly what he's looking for, but they've gone out of bounds and then stopped them. And so exactly this here, this is where you're going to see a lot of stack passing and double under passing starting to come up, is the more that you threaten a lot of passes on your opponent, force them to lift their hips and throw their legs, you're going to be able to have that opportunity there. And so interesting sort of gripping sequence here from Mateusz, potentially to try and set up the Choi bar on that side. Which is something that he does have in his arsenal, but I feel like he used to use a lot more previously. And it could also just be that people are a lot more aware of it now. Like I've moved away a lot from using the Choi bar, just because I do think at a high level people are very aware of it. And it's similar to the sort of scooping of the leg that we talked about before. Video might be messing up again. The scooping of the leg that we talked about before. It concedes a lot of resources from the bottom player and can take you out of position quite a fair bit defensively. And so from there, Mateusz goes on to take the decision for the match, which I think is it just depends on scoring criteria. Like obviously both athletes did a lot in the match, and I think depending on how you choose to score certain criteria, the decision could have gone either way. Which is a shame that it could have gone either way for a match, where the prize is $30,000. But overall, I think it was just a very interesting match, particularly looking at where both the athletes have sort of evolved to in terms of that sort of guard player, guard passer dynamic. And personally, I just think it's just a very fascinating match.